Wonderful. Good morning. This is the Policy Review Committee for the Columbus City School Board. We may have some uh, folks watching this on Facebook or YouTube. Uh, Want to call the meeting to order and roll call, please.
Chair Brown,
Yes.
Board Member Cole,
Present, thank you.
Board Member Pierce,
Present.
Ms. Beasley,
Present.
Ms. Klein,
Present.
Ms. Ellingson,
Present.
Mr. Holt,
Here.
Ms. White.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you for adding this meeting in. And we want to try to make progress, perhaps even to completion of an equity policy. But we made good progress last time. Everybody's had a chance to take a look and think on these. You've had both a Word document and a Google Docs document to work from. Does somebody have any thoughts about where to begin today? Do we want to review what we did the last time? Start out with that area of preamble.
Yeah, that would be great. I would appreciate that because unfortunately I missed the last meeting, so that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Why don't we do that? Eric, you able to put that up?
There it is. So what you have before you, the purpose, as you see here, is what was worked on last time. This is the preamble. Then everything below that is the remainder of the Baltimore policy at this point, just as a template from which to work. I also have the Google Docs pulled up. I can switch to that document as well if we need to or want to. That has Dr. Pierce's comments.
Right.
That document also includes our correct?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
That document also includes our preamble, correct?
That is correct.
So could we pull that document up?
And the preamble that we're talking about it's what's listed here as purpose.
That is correct. We can rename it preamble if you all would like to. Purpose is what we'd worked from last time, but yeah. I can certainly change it to preamble if that's.
No, I don't have a problem. I just in my head was referring to it that way. But all right. So everybody want to take a look at what we have down there for purpose and make sure that you're all comfortable with that language.
So I'm comfortable with the language based upon some of the definitions that I like to recommend. I did include an additional term. I included neighborhood. So if you look at the educational equity definition, it includes neighborhood. So if we want to go back and include neighborhood within our purpose, I think it's fine the way the purpose is written right now. Us capturing neighborhood in the educational equity definition. It is a good starting point for us, and I'm okay either way. I'll just note that again, neighborhood has been added in the definition of educational equity.
And when you use the word neighborhood here, what do you have in mind specifically? Are you talking about geographical neighborhood or something else?
So specifically, when we talk about a lot of the research that's been done by the United Way, our Kerwin Institute at The Ohio State University, what that research has shown is that neighborhood, your zip code, defines opportunities within our city, within our municipal area. And so it's important that we are in tune and in touch with that research, that we acknowledge that, and that within our equity policy, we are mindful to remedy and correct for that. So that's what I have in mind.
Others have thoughts on that?
I'm great with it. We've talked over years about zip codes and
Right.
that type of thing. So I think it's appropriate.
I agree. I think it's a great addition.
I also think that because our schools are such an important neighborhood resource, like being mindful about pulling in priorities and assets and everything else that a neighborhood brings is really smart here.
Good.
So is the desire, so we're good with it here in educational equity. Is there still, am I hearing there's a desire to add neighborhood here under the purpose statement? I just want to be clear.
Yes.
Let me ask this. While we're making sure that this policy is sufficiently broad, that the definition is sufficiently broad, do we want to add the word culture?
I think a great deal of that is already encapsulated. And you're talking about creed, color, religion, ancestry, national origin. I mean, a lot of this is definitely encapsulates culture. But neighborhood definitely captures the geographic aspect. I just think that's the last nail.
And another word would be community, which is something that gets away from any geographic aspect, but it's just people that are affiliated in a community. LGBT is sometimes considered that. I know we talk about gender and sexual orientation specifically. Any thoughts?
So my thoughts on that is that when we go down to our definition of our equity lens, that picks up community. So it specifically identifies those values, issues that are important to particular communities. Also acknowledging that sometimes when we collect data, we need to go directly into particular communities to ensure that we have accurate and appropriate data. So I think we get at that with our equity lens definition.
Any further thoughts? Okay. Let's keep moving. We've got some definitions here. Could scroll down, Eric. Any thoughts about these definitions?
thought they were really well done, like very beautifully organized, comprehensive, and powerful.
May I ask just a point of clarification? This is for my own edification. And Dr. Pierce, please, is it socioeconomics or socioeconomic status? What's the parlance currently and it's being used, if you could help.
So socioeconomic status would be fine. I have no preference, so we could change that to socioeconomic status.
I didn't know if there was something that's being used currently in academia as far as what the terminology is, and you're more adept with that than I am at this point. So I'm fine either way, but I just wanted to know.
We tend to use socioeconomic status. Now, when I did the LGBTQ, the traditional, or the acronym that's normally used, I guess, is LGBTQIA. So I got those mixed up. So it's
LGBTQIA. And do we want to put a plus at the end of that?
Yes, please. And this, when we get to our equity lens definition, I think it's important that we included that aspect of our undocumented immigrants, and that we're sensitive to the collection of data around their experiences in our schools, in our neighborhoods and communities. So I think it's important that we just include that we're mindful, that we stay focused on sometimes the data that we collect currently, or the data that we have in mind to collect, may miss significant groups and communities. And I think it's important that within our policy, we acknowledge that and we work towards getting that data.
Now, we did pass a policy on immigration, not a policy, but a statement on immigration status some time back. Do we want to work the immigration status into this? I was thinking in A, in our definition.
Maybe we just list immigration status then, because I just worry that, you know, like undocumented immigrants, for instance, doesn't necessarily include dreamers who are partially documented but still vulnerable.
Right.
Are you asking then that we change undocumented immigrants to immigration status here?
Yeah, maybe facing inequities based on immigration status.
Yes, you would have to put that extra word in.
I know I mangled it. So
Okay.
examining equity facing
Individuals based on. After facing.
What he's based on.
Thank you.
Individuals.
Check out the facing.
Do we need to add facing here then? Inequity based on the LGBTQAI plus community?
Or those faced by?
Just clarifying, it's LGBTQIA, so you have to flip the A and the I.
You're right.
Thank you.
question. These definitions, all three of them, are somewhat long and wordy, and I'm not saying we should take away from that, but I'm not sure that the average person who might look at this is going to get it right away. I'm wondering about including a very simple, straightforward statement about equity, either here or perhaps way up top, just saying what we mean by equity. What I have in mind would read as follows. Let's see, possibly 4 sentences. The first, equality is not enough. Second sentence, equality is treating everyone the same. Third, equity is giving everyone what they need to be successful. And then fourth is a bit longer. Equality, well, actually 4 and 5. Equality aims to promote fairness, but it can only work if everyone starts from the same place, needs the same help. And finally, equity may appear unfair, but it actively moves everyone closer to success. By leveling the playing field.
Did I capture that correctly there?
I believe so. I was looking at my notes, not yours.
I wonder, I mean, I know we all come to this project with sort of different professional backgrounds and sort of writing styles and things like that. In the legal profession that I work in, a definition section like this, you really would want it to be very, very short and compact, such as Eric has suggested. But I also love all of the analysis and the statement of purpose and all of that have been captured here. One way to sort of do both would be to have a short definition like this and then literally put comment section and say this was our discussion, and these are our values that lead to the definition section. And that's used all the time for various laws and other things, like regulations. And the comment section can inform the definitions when there's any ambiguity or question about what they mean. But the workable part of that language is brief and short and to the point. I'm just throwing that out there, that might be a way to capture this excellent work that Dr. Pierce has put together, while also making the document very workable for the people who need to actually enforce it.
So I am going to advocate for robust definitions. I think when we do an analysis of the past equity policies that we've had, they have been brief and they have not captured the work that needs to be done within our schools and within our district. They have not clearly defined what our expectations are as a board, the expectations that we have of our administrators and educators within our district. So for me, the work isn't so much around how we can make it short and concise, but how we can make it clear and explicit in regards to exactly what this policy seeks to remedy. Eric, so Board Member Brown, when we talk about your equity definition at the beginning, I feel that those are statements that are then captured in our policy standards. You know, how do we plan to operationalize this? How do we plan to measure what we mean by educational equity? So when you say equity aims to promote fairness, that gets us down to, Dr. Roush, if you could go down a little bit. That takes us down to our standards, where we really begin to look at what does that look like for an educator in our district to really promote equity. It looks like that educator is self-aware. It's self-aware how their culture, how their stereotypes, how their bias may play into the curriculum that they're teaching, the images that are in classrooms. We're examining the system's impacts on our families and students and acknowledging, for example, what we see happening in the streets of Minneapolis last night and happening in the streets of Columbus, Ohio last night over, again, the death, unwarranted, unjustified, of a Black male, that we are acknowledging what is going on in our community through our very actions, and our actions are laid out very clear in these standards. So again, for me, it's very important that whether it is long, whether one has to read it and really digest it, but it's important that we are very clear and explicit about what this policy entails, and definitions guide us that way.
So Dr. Pierce, thank you for that, because I'm actually one of those people who supports this way of looking at it with greater intention. I think it's important for us, just to back you up in saying that, it's important for us to spell out with every bit of clarity. And this is part of our conversations that we've had many years in advance, but also more succinctly last night, with regards to the whole PDK piece. We need to be as intentional as possible here, because I do like Eric's comment about leveling the playing field. Would it be appropriate to put that part of that in as a part of your definition in the first one of those sentences? And I can't see, because I think, thank you for that, Dr. Roush. Every student has access to the opportunities, resources, and educational rigor that they need throughout their educational journey to maximize academic success, level the playing field, and level the playing field for, I don't know, somewhere in there, we could put level the playing field, maximize academic success, and social emotional well-being. Educational journey to level the playing field, maximize academic success, and social emotional well-being.
So again, I think when we get down to the standards, we pick that up because we talk about resource allocation. So the proposed recommendation, Dr. Roush, if you go down further to our standards, down. When we accept institutional policy, institutional responsibility, our goals as we lay them out, we're picking up those elements and aspects of leveling the playing field there. So I think with definitions, you're just, again, defining what you mean by a particular term. Leveling the playing field is a concise way to state what you mean to do through action. You intend through your actions to level the playing field, to ensure that everybody has the resources that they need to be successful. To me, that's a standard versus a definition.
Well, let me offer at least some additional thoughts about why I am suggesting the statements that I did. We have several different audiences that we're writing policy for. We're obviously writing policy for our superintendent and for our administrators so that they know precisely what it is that's expected of them. And I think that these things are all good for them. Tina's work is particularly helpful because they are professionals. They can read and understand what's here and put it to use. Same with our teachers. We are, again, explaining very clearly and comprehensively what's expected. However, we've got the whole rest of the community. We've got the public, we've got parents. My sense is that most of the wording that's offered here, while good, is not language that will be understood by most people. I have gone through the same thing throughout my career with lawyers. Lawyers tend to write in legalese, and it's too wordy, and it's technical words, longer words, and this has some of the same qualities, this writing. I think that we need to include a definition, the fundamental concept here, which is the difference between equality and equity, the fundamental concept of what equity is, that these are two different ways to achieve fairness. And there are other ways to try to achieve fairness. Kids talk about things being fair or unfair. And they often think only in terms of equality. The public tends to do that. And I anticipate that we will have pushback from parts of the community when we start allocating resources either more visibly or more robustly to where they're needed rather than treating everybody equally. It hasn't occurred that I'm aware of, but I think we need to be clear and simple with easy to understand words for that purpose. That's why I would suggest that we even highlight this paragraph, put a box around it or bold it or something that will allow the public and our students for that matter to quickly get a handle on what this is all about, because the average person is not going to read through this entire policy.
So as a proud parent in the district, I'm going to advocate on behalf of those individuals that you think will not understand these definitions. Again, I'm a product of this district. I'm a parent in this district. I have numerous family members who are also in this district, cousins, relatives, and my children attend this district. Our community is very capable of understanding these definitions. I do think there can be value in adding a definition for equity, but to use the bias of our community not being able to understand definitions as a rationale for that, to me, is short-sighted. It is biased, and it gets to what you think the limitation of our community is.
What community are you referring to, Tina?
If I could add,
And your
coming from the disability
community wouldn't understand.
Yeah, Joellen?
Yeah. So I do think that there is, I do think there is some value in summarizing what we're talking about here the difference between equity and equitability. So in my mind, Chair Brown, what you were trying to get at was putting the cartoon that we have all seen of the kids looking over the baseball fence with the different size boxes into words. And I don't think that summarizing the overall difference between equity and equality necessarily means that we are trying to say that folks won't understand, people in the district who read this policy won't understand the definitions. It is more of a simplification when people, myself, anyone would look at this policy and say, that's a lot to read. What's the summary? What are we trying to get at?
And again, to clarify, I agree with that. I agree with, let's add a definition to explain what equity is. What I disagree with is the rationale for why that definition should be added, that our community is lacking of intellectual basis to understand definition.
I just want to chime in here and say we do have people with intellectual disabilities in our community, and in the disability rights field, it is a best practice and very common to include a simplified summary of all content. If you look at I'm a member of the Disability Rights Bar Association. If you look at any of the leading practitioners in our field, we explain very complex, legal terminology, events, things like that. It is a best practice to include a simplified summary to make sure that all members of our community can actually understand what the policy is and be able to access it and be able to engage with it. I do think that it is important to have a simplified summary, and I don't think that that's insulting to the disability community to recognize that there are people who do need it broken down. We've got a lot of big words like disaggregated, marginalized, that I can tell you absolutely there are people in our community who do not actually understand what those words mean and would benefit by a simplified summary.
So I appreciate that coming from the perspective of individuals in our community that are intellectually challenged or disabled, if that is the correct term. From what I gathered from Dr. Brown, or Board Member Brown's initial statements, was that was not the community he had in mind. He was talking about our larger community and whether our parents would understand it. So again, as a product of our district, as a parent in our district, I'm going to advocate and stand up to say that our parents, our community members, many of them have the wherewithal to understand the definitions that have been laid out.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I definitely appreciate the conversation. Let's as I'm listening, I'm just distilling, and I want to be able to distill down to the initial question at hand, which was, do we incorporate this into a standards part of our document, or do we incorporate this into the denotative aspect or definition base of our document? I don't think that there's any issue with the redundancy of leveling the playing field. I think as much as we can state that in the definition, it could also be stated as platform for what a standard. Okay, so I think we want to make sure we get right back to the substance of what we're trying to address, and that is the standards versus the definition. And again, I'm in support of both Eric and Dr. Pierce in saying that we should have that in the standards piece that spells it out, that gives it that summative aspect, right? But at the same time, incorporates it into our definition in a way that, again, makes it a little more simple and plain to understand as well. But I don't want to, I think it's important for us as a board, because if, Lord, God forbid, the folks who are the framers of the Constitution, or even the framers of Ohio Revised Code having this kind of conversation. There's going to be things that folks just don't understand because it's in legalese or it's because it's within the rhetoric or nomenclature of that given organization or industry. At the end of the day, what we want to make sure we're doing is being very intentional on what it is that we're saying so that it covers everything that is our expectation of the administration to adhere to. So with that, I just want to move back to, if it's okay with everyone else, can we put some of this in the standard piece but still incorporate this into that definition? And that specifically being the language saying level the playing field.
Is there direction where you want this?
Well, I would either leave it right there, or I would highlight it at the very top of the policy, and perhaps bold it or put it in a box. But I think that I could go either way. I think where it is fine, but again, I think it's something that should be highlighted.
Just a suggestion, should we maybe put it as the third paragraph of purpose? Because the purpose section, I mean, it's the purpose section right now is like an editorial, and I like that for what it is. But putting that there would be a sort of a high level summary, I guess.
That's actually what I was just going to ask. It should be the last paragraph. Yeah.
That's fine too.
I think that's actually, I think that's an appropriate closing statement in a way. Equality is not enough. Yeah.
And Board Member Pierce, you put some definitions in the chat box. Do you want me to add those to the definition section here as well?
So it's up to the committee. I think if we were to bring those down to definitions, the second one that I gave to make the distinction and the clear difference between what equity and what equity is versus what equality is. Again, for me, we have to be very clear and explicit about the work that we're doing, and use terms that point us to action versus terms that make us feel good.
And I can renumber these as needed.
I missed what you were doing on the screen. Did you?
I added that.
You added this,
Added.
or was
It's an
this
addition.
replacing? Okay.
This is a pure addition. It just is an insertion here.
Okay.
So when I was distilling the conversation, you wanted to put something in there about leveling the playing field. And really what leveling the playing field gets at is what the difference between equity and equality is. So you can spell that out in the definitions. So I sent this definition via chat. Again, what equity versus equality is in actionable language. Pointing to the systems, the processes that we will put in place to ensure each child has an equal chance for success.
Given how the definitions are here, should we lead with equality versus equity there, Dr. Pierce? I'm just.
Yes,
Maybe
that's fine with me. The switch on. And then we would need to change that. I think that will become B.
so. Just to recap, we've added a new definition B: equality versus equity. And then we also added a third paragraph under purpose. Are folks good with this?
Looks good, Eric.
Thank
So
you.
Dr. Ross, if we're good with that third paragraph being added to the purpose, we should remove it from the definitions area.
Thank you. And then I guess did you want to look one more time at the equity lens to make sure you had that definition where you wanted it? I think that kind of precipitated some additional conversation. So I just want to make sure that that's where everybody wants equity lens.
So remember White added sensory. I like that. Thank you for that addition. I think it's a great addition.
That was Ms. White.
Thank you for that. That's a great addition.
And then you had not yet discussed equity outcomes.
I like this in theory, but I guess what I'm wondering really about the whole policy is how is this thing enforceable? Who specifically is tasked with enforcing it? And like, how is that done? Is it a report? Is it, you know, and so equity outcomes does refer to specific measurable outcomes for equity efforts, but the policy doesn't define what those are. I mean, obviously the standards part gives a little bit more guidance, but a lot of it is still kind of subjective. I guess we define equity outcomes, but then I don't see like what the policy does with that later on.
So thank you for that. We have hired a chief equity officer who will start that position the 1st of August this year. We will work collaboratively with that staff, with that personnel and the superintendent to ensure that we then design a strategic plan that incorporates these elements in a way that is measurable. And the way that you look at that is you take, for example, something like technology. Technologically, we're trying to ensure that XYZ number of students have access to this type of, high-speed platform. I'm just using an example, but this is how you operationalize it. You operationalize this language by looking at very specific things that are disparate needs within our learning community and then prioritize them accordingly. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. I wonder though if we might want to put a placeholder process here to both to provide more guidance to the individual that we're bringing on board, but also just to make sure that this becomes enforceable. Like perhaps maybe say by X date per year, the equity officer will identify areas of priority and an action plan for working on it consistent with our policy. Or maybe we even, if we know some of the bigger picture areas, say these will always be something that we'll think about, whether those are, something that I would like to see something that comes out of this that's like a report or an act, like something that like some person has to do.
Yeah, okay. The added guardrail, so to speak.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. No, I got you. Thank you.
So Committee Member White, thank you so much. This is absolutely a great question. The reason I recommended this particular definition gets at the board retreat that we had even last night with Dr. Stripling. Our policies are lacking in regards to our governance structure being able to hold administrators, our schools accountable for action. And so this definition lays out that we are focused on looking at equity outcomes. Now, I think adding in by a date, by a time per year, that's an administrative function. On our end in governance, we have to lay out that we want to see equity outcomes in various aspects of our work as a district, whether that's in particular lesson planning, whether that's in particular programming that we do. We simply provide the framework to say, we're looking for measurable, specific actions that take place to remedy inequities within our district. I think when we go down to policy standards, that starts to lay out what our value system is as a board, right? Our value system is that we want to ensure that our educators are self-aware, that our educators are in touch with our community, with our students, that we're taking responsibility institutionally for remedying these things. Now, how we get to that, those goals that are set forward, the specific actions, those are more administrative. I would at this point not feel comfortable adding a specific placeholder for action in this particular definition. I think when we come down to standards, we start to look and say, here are some potential goals that we have in mind. And we work with the superintendent and the new equity officer to say, where's a good starting point for us to begin to do this work?
Just a thought, I hear you on all of that, but I'm still very much stuck in like who does what and when. And so I'm wondering if we could sort of honor both, giving enough flexibility to the folks that are being charged with administering this to say at least on an annual basis, the superintendent or their designee, which of course is going to be the equity officer, will develop specific measurable outcomes for equity efforts. And there will be another point annually where there will be a report and evaluation on progress towards those goals. Because I think that this has so much potential to be a useful document, but if we don't have anybody where the buck stops with them, it's got to be done. They've got to do it, and they've got to produce some response for, I mean, literally, like who's looking at these things? Who's measuring? Are we self-aware? Are we providing these resources? And then, okay, now we know there's a problem. What are we doing about it? And it doesn't have to be granular to the sense that we necessarily identify the specific annual outcomes for this year, but at least saying that we're going to have it done at a certain time period, I think is going to be important. And I also I really think it's important that we say who does it. Any sort of administrative regulatory scheme will say that. Here's the agency charged with carrying out this policy. These are the goals of the policy, and this is how it's done. It's done through a report. It's done. That's the part that I really think this committee should put some teeth in.
Open to putting it in the standards versus the definition? Could we move it down to a standards area?
No, I think it should actually be an entirely separate section, because we have definitions, we have the standards, and then we need the meat, like who does what, and say enforcement of this policy. And then I think it should say, parties responsible. It'll be the superintendent and the superintendent's designee. And then, you know, what's done on an annual basis, the measurable outcomes will be identified. Or maybe even starts with, you know, an assessment will be done of what our equity needs are, what are the biggest priorities, then a plan to achieve it, and then finally a follow-up to see how did we do.
Mr. Chair, because I hear what both of you guys are saying. I actually agree. I think though, to the definition piece, maybe it's not so much the charge of what we're expecting from the superintendent or designated staff. Maybe it's just saying that the board will do so and so and so. So at least annually, the Board of Education will identify, what did you have up there initially? At least annually.
I think that we have to identify what our goal, what our you know, equity needs are. It's some way to say we're capturing what the problem is, we're putting together a plan to solve the problem, and then finally we're looking back and saying, how did we do in solving the problem? Like, I think that at least those 3 steps have to be captured in some way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So then what it is at least annually, the Board of Education shall report its measurable outcomes towards equity in the Columbus City School District. That is a part of our definition piece. Now we can unpack that in the standard, or we can unpack that in the implementation section. But we've made it very clear in the definition section that this is what the Board of Education intends to do. So now we know off the jump that there's going to be some measure of accountability by, you know, from all of our direct reports, not just our superintendent, but our internal auditor and our treasurer, to ensure that there's equity within the district within their given roles. But we're saying that we're going to produce some sort of report or about measurables moving forward. And whatever that language was, I suggested we see how that looks as the last sentence of the equity outcomes piece.
I was going to ask you to repeat what you suggested before.
Might I suggest that we actually, so if we go back to the Baltimore template that we're following, what committee member White is pointing us to is the next steps in our policy creation. And that would be additional sections, and those additional sections would be implementation strategies and compliance.
Yeah, I think it's better just to state either
Yes,
implementation or compliance. I think would be the stronger words, but I still don't want to take that out of that definition. Again, it's saying what the Board of Education will, what our intent is to have happen. Again, we're not necessarily providing directive language about what the superintendent will be responsible for in the definition section. That definition just closes out saying that the Board of Education will provide annual report on
I would just again like to recommend that go under compliance, because that gets to the action at hand. Definitions again are stating what our values are, directing us to what we mean by the terms that we're using. I think when we start to put our action steps into our definitions, we are we're missing the opportunity to really put meat in the compliance section.
No,
I completely agree.
You really aren't. You really aren't. It's what it is. It's just an opportunity to state with even greater clarity what this last sentence of the equities outcomes, a part of the definition, really means. It's not a missing an opportunity at all. You're actually unpacking it right in that section to say, okay, this is our standard, and then these are the requirements subsequent of all of our direct reports to ensure the following. That's it.
That's inconsistent with our other definitions, because within this definition, we've given an action. We haven't given an action in any of our other definitions. So what makes this one in particular special that it calls for us to add that action in?
Dr.
Well-
Pierce, I love that language that you identified from Baltimore. I think that really does the trick in pulling it out as a separate implement. And we could cut and paste that. The only thing I don't like about it is that it doesn't include a time frame. Like, I really think that just putting a time frame and a commitment in there adds an urgency that's necessary for this kind of policy. And I think an annual time frame is the right time scale here, because getting a handle on the problem, putting together the goals, talking about progress towards solutions should be done at least on an annual basis.
I agree. So you're suggesting that we cut and paste all that? Dr.
Yeah.
Ross, is there a way that we can change those designee titles from the CEO to superintendent? And with that, is our new person the chief of equity?
By virtue of the fact that through your definitions, the superintendent means the superintendent and anybody they so designate. If you put chief of equity, if that title ever changes, we got to go back in the policy and change it. So if they become the chief of equity and something else, technically we should go back in and change the title. This allows them to, or you put superintendent and the individual who is responsible for insurance and the person so designated. Putting titles like that, we've run into this before with guidelines. We had executive directors for various divisions. Well, we went to area superintendent, so we had to go back and change all of those. So
I would go with just the word superintendent. It's entirely up to her how she manages those things and who does what within the organizational structure. That's not something that we decide and those are not people we direct.
I would recommend getting rid of also the sentence B altogether as well, because that really has more to do with like employment equity, which this policy is more inclusive than that. And also, if you really were going to make this the employment equity policy, you'd want it to be a lot more detailed than this. But this paragraph C is the one that I think really does the job for us here, which basically says we're going to evaluate our needs. We're going to put standards. Only instead of accountability standards, I think we would want to pull down the language that we used in the definition section for the equity standards. And then you've got something that's clean that gives flexibility at guidance. I do think we do need to put annually though. Superintendent shall ensure that at least on an annual basis, the evaluation plan and accountability, the evaluation that these are developed, something on an annual basis. Instead of accountability standards, we'll put like the specific measurable outcomes.
Do we want to call that an equity plan?
I think we should mirror the language for the definition sections that you had drafted, because I thought those were beautiful and do the trick. But for implementation, we want to make sure that we're using the same words for the definitions that we've just laid out.
Equity outcomes. Superintendent shall ensure that on an annual basis, a plan that adheres to board's expectations of equity outcomes.
So maybe the product of this is two different things. One is going to be a plan, like an evaluation of our equity needs, and then an evaluation of our equity, of our specific measurable outcomes to meet those needs. I don't know if we want that to be one document or not, but to me, they're conceptually two different things.
So you see that there's an evaluation plan, and then there's another document or another report that then talks about. You see them as two separate documents or two separate processes.
Well, they're two separate things. They might be in the same plan, but something to capture. We want to do to ensure that on an annual basis, an assessment or an evaluation of the district's equity needs is performed, and then also we create a plan with specific measurable outcomes to meet the equity needs. So Dr. Pierce, do you have any ideas for how we could capture that? Something to say, we're gonna look inside, we're gonna be introspective here and see what our needs are first before we craft the specific measurable outcomes, because those should be informed by where we stand now.
Mm-hmm. So what I would say with our superintendent shall annually create an equity plan that includes equity outcomes.
That includes assessment. That includes the assessment of, need. So we want to include an assessment, and then we want to separately, I guess, in the other sentence is develop a plan for measurable steps towards equity. So an assessment of equity needs within the district. The superintendent shall annually create an equity plan that includes the assessment of equity needs of the district, period. And let's just kind of use this as a boilerplate unless folks are just comfortable with it. But then, then something that says that the superintendent shall also be required to develop a strategic plan that addresses the specific needs
Yes.
of that assessment or
So I guess, again, I'm going back to if we are okay with keeping the policy standard for accept institutional responsibility, that first goal states out that we provide structure and supports to improve practices. We aim to hold departments accountable for reducing and eliminating disparities by establishing targets for performance and incorporating equity outcomes as an element of system assessment and individual performance evaluation. So as I think about where we're going with this implementation piece, it becomes not just the needs assessment, but it also gives the superintendent and the designee an opportunity to highlight how they've achieved those equity outcomes in that previous year and their plans to continue to tackle equity moving forward. So you're assessing what our needs are. You also have the opportunity to say, here's what we're doing to meet those needs. Here's what else we need to do to continue to meet those needs. It becomes a 3-step process that we're including in that overall equity plan. So we develop a strategic plan that addresses the specific needs identified by that assessment. I
wonder here
provide updates on current equity outcomes. So back where we say plan that addresses the specific needs identified by that assessment, comma, take out the second specific, right there, there you are. Yes, take out that specific. What did I say? Provide updates on equity outcomes. Comma, and we can change this language, forecast future measures to address equity.
Or identify areas in need of continued improvement in equity. maybe.
That's excellent.
Say that again and tell me where. I'm sorry.
Perhaps instead of forecasting future measures, we identify areas for continued improvement. That way we're not just dropping the ball where it landed. We're you know, continuing this continuous process. For continued improvement.
Excellent.
There should be an and before identify. For
I've
continued.
got one other recommendation here. I think it would be helpful at some point, probably in the implementation strategy, to specifically include an element of public participation in the implementation and identification. Something to say that to the greatest extent necessary, if possible, the superintendent or the designee shall provide for public comment, something to engage with the public and have this not just be like an internal document, but to really get community input about what the equity needs are and where the, how the district is doing. So I think that in some ways the district being so large, it can feel difficult to have that input when you're only day to day visiting a particular school, which all have significant needs.
So you want them to engage with the community in the assessment and the development and
in every stage of it. Shall ensure community engagement in identifying needs and developing strategies for in developing the strategic plan, maybe.
I would take out that second strategic plan and put equity plan, or the term that we decide to go with.
I would recommend that the paragraph that starts with the superintendent shall annually create, I think you should put annually, comma, the superintendent shall, and then go on from there. That way the annually create will not just modify the equity plan, but will be everything in that paragraph.
thank you.
On that third paragraph or sentence, the one above, I'm uncertain about identifying strategies for the equity plan. That is, certainly having the community engagement to identify needs makes a lot of sense to me, and that's important. But to inform the superintendent about how she's supposed to do things to address those needs, I think is beyond the scope of what we should be doing.
Fair enough.
So you would just strike that second piece here.
I would.
Do we need to modify needs to equity needs?
Yes.
Yes.
I think we should remove that first paragraph. The superintendent is responsible for ensuring applicable federal and law. I mean, yes, but not necessary here.
And
Right.
you also suggested deleting this training and programming timeline.
I think you can delete everything after the identifying equity needs.
You don't think we need?
I think there might be value in keeping that as a part of the annual plan and responsibilities, the training and programming. I think one of the things that we will see when we start to think about what this looks like in our schools, what this looks like in our everyday practice, training is going to have to be a component of that. ensuring that our educators are culturally competent across the diversity spectrum. So I would like to keep in an aspect that holds the superintendent or the designee responsible for ensuring that there's an annual plan for training and programming related to equity.
Do you want to bind them necessarily, though, to that? Because it seems to me that's going to be an important tool, but just one among many. I'll tell you the reason that that's there is because of federal employment law provides an affirmative defense to employers who provide training on like harassment or discrimination.
Mhm.
That's why they included that, is to be able to put down that marker and say, we're going to do that particular thing. But it makes sense to me for an employment specific plan. But once again, you know, there's lots of potential tools that could be used to implement this strategy. Training is an important one, but not the only one. I don't.
I think so. As I think about my engagement with Reimagine Me, the conference that we held 2 or 3 years back under Academic Chief Gillison, there were elements of restorative justice. There were elements of cultural competency throughout that conference for all of our staff members that attended that conference. But I haven't quite, and board members Brown and Cole, please speak to this because you might have more information on it than I do. I'm not quite aware of our current professional development and training policy really being intentional around those aspects. And so for me, this policy would be an opportunity to hold them accountable to ensure that we're providing those types of trainings.
I'm totally in support of that, and I think that it should be inclusive of our socio-emotional piece as well. I think it should incorporate that as a part of the equity language, because that's a central part of, you know, from a school building to school building basis, what we do. So it should incorporate our elements of socio-emotional learning as well. That folks are trained on that.
So could we include just that language in the first paragraph under implementation strategies? The superintendent shall be required to develop a strategic plan that addresses the specific needs identified by the assessment, provides updates on equity outcomes,
And we went back to
training and programming. Identifies training and programming. Provides updates on equity outcomes, identifies training and programming related to equity, and identifies measures for future improvement to address equity.
I would just add that if that is the case, that we need to look and see if there is a policy regarding training and programming or trainings for staff, and specify that staff needs to participate in equity training.
There's a variety. I think there's a couple of policies that talk about training in different areas. So, because again, a lot of the policies are lifted right from the statute. There's different statutory provisions of certain kinds of training that we have to offer. And so I think you'll find that's smattered throughout a couple of different policies.
I think that we need to edit the first paragraph and the fourth paragraph and blend them together, because both of them have elements that are good, but they're entirely repetitive. So I think we need to smooth it out and decide which language we prefer. I like that the fourth one uses that specific measurable equity outcomes that mirrors the language we've been using throughout.
Superintendent shall.
Yeah, so I think that maybe what we should do is say the superintendent shall develop a strategic plan that addresses the specific needs identified by the assessment by providing specific measurable outcomes. And then I think we should also put and develop an annual plan for training and programming with a timeline to ensure full implementation. And then period. And then start a new sentence that goes on updates. So then we'll have 3 sentences that go through the layers of identify the plan, or identify the needs, identify the plan, identify our progress. And maybe we even want to break it down into like A, B, and C. So on an annual basis, the superintendent shall A, create an equity plan, B, do the strategic plan, C, provide an update.
You would strike that. Start. So B would start with develop.
Yeah.
Mhm. C would start at provides.
Yes.
So you would.
And yeah, and then
Yeah.
provide an update on equity outcomes.
D would start with identify.
I think the identifying training, it really goes into the strategic plan part. I think that should be incorporated into the plan. The plan will address specific needs identified by the assessment. And then there was a sentence that was hanging out here that talked about training and programming with a timeline to ensure implementation. I think that should be included somewhere in B.
Yes.
So that we have a plan and we have specific measurable outcomes that we're going to achieve with this plan. Yeah, so maybe if we pull the specific measurable equity outcomes to the end of that sentence in B, then we can talk about what that plan is going to include. In that plan, it sounds like we want it to include training and programming in a timeline, and then comma, to achieve specific measurable equity outcomes.
So I would just pick up at the by developing an annual plan for training and programming with the timeline. So I would strike from the first by all the way to the second by. Go down one. So B, right there, that by all the way across, strike all of that till you get, no, go back. Pick up that, yes, right there. Assessment by developing an annual plan for training and programming with timelines to ensure full implementation. Yes. Should we be putting semicolons at the end of these sentences because they're all a part of what the superintendent shall do? So instead of a period. Semicolon, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. We should remove, yes. Here we go. Can we think of a different word than using identify and identifies in D and E? Matter of fact, we can just strike out D. Because,
yeah.
So strike out D.
Right. I think provide progress on an update on the district's progress in achieving the specific measurable equity outcomes.
I like that.
We've basically written an IEP for the district. We've done the assessment and now we've done the plan. So
we're on a roll.
Yes, we are, and we're nearing the time that we need to stop for this morning.
I think instead of measures, can
we actually gave ourselves until 10:30 today.
Ah, that's right.
I apologize for interrupting, Ms. White.
Oh, no problem. Can we put identify areas for future improvement?
Yes.
And maybe I'm rethinking annually, maybe say at least on an annual basis.
You know, I like annual though. I think so. I like annual, and I think this does give the superintendent flexibility to at least annually report on what the district is doing to ensure that there's equity and we're moving in that direction. And I think there would be some flexibility in potentially where she focuses that report on an annual basis, right?
Yeah.
What area she focuses, or he or she focuses on, sorry, about those pronouns.
I think we've got some repetition in paragraph B that we need to smooth out because we say we develop a plan twice. So we need to develop a plan that addresses the specific equity needs. And then I think we say including training and programming.
An equity plan that addresses the needs.
And then comma with a timeline. Oh, and we need to have specific measurable outcomes appear in paragraph B as well.
Where do you want to add those?
This is needs.
Here?
Yeah, and I think there, yeah. Including, yeah, and then just put including training, programming, and then comma, including specific measurable equity outcomes and a timeline. And we should use equity outcomes because we've been using that throughout.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can we make the community engagement part an E?
Yeah.
To the greatest extent practical, the superintendent shall ensure.
Correct.
And we get a semicolon at the end of D and that and. And then I think we can strike out. I think that's good. So we can take out that paragraph below E and the assessment of needs, how did we do? Yeah, take all of that out. Now with the Baltimore plan, their compliance piece, the board, how do we feel about that compliance piece? The Baltimore plan has a different compliance piece than what we had right there.
I'm not sure that building by building is the appropriate lens to view this particular compliance policy because so many of our needs can cut across neighborhoods, communities, and things like that. I'm just thinking of that curriculum audit that says, you know, hey, our LEP families have problems across the board. Requiring an annual report might burden, you know, individual principals while not really providing meaningful data or advancing things. Ordinarily, a policy like this in other fields would have something to say. People could make complaints and complaints will be addressed for compliance. But here, I mean, it's really something that we're really asking the superintendent to manage in a public way, which is another, I mean, that's perfectly appropriate, but I don't know if you need to put a compliance paragraph there, if that's what it is.
Well, I like the piece about each school and district office developing their annual equity priorities. I like that piece from the Baltimore language. Clearly, it wouldn't be a blueprint. It would be a strategic plan or their outlined school performance plan.
Is there any similar document, though, that is currently done at a school by school basis that this could be another line item added in just to be a little bit more efficient for our administrators?
So well, when we had the site-based council, schools were building by building, creating kind of these performance plans for their year. Or
they still do that. The continuous improvement process that's run through the state, that the state has.
So we like that.
To align this with whatever we're currently doing.
I kind of like that piece being added in, because that then directs each school that equity should be on your mind. There should be something in that continuous improvement plan that speaks to how your school is addressing equity.
That's not what it's called, so we'll just make them all lowercase, and then we'll be able to clarify from there.
Do we want to create this committee that they create? I mean, that's another way to sort of ensure a more thoughtful community engagement to make sure you're really reaching hard to reach groups rather than just the people who are shouting loudest.
My only concern with that would be that in our board retreats, they've indicated that we have quite a bit of committees in our district that we should not create anymore. So how would you feel about us indicating that the superintendent or designee, since we're about to get a chief of equity, that individual is engaging with district staff on the progress towards the implementation of the policy, and that individual is, along with the superintendent, providing that annual report to the board?
I like that, but I don't think it should be limited to district staff. I think it should be like literally every stakeholder, from students to parents to families to neighborhoods. Definitely staff should be included, but maybe just community and stakeholders.
I like that. So we're engaged with community and stakeholders on progress towards implementation of the policy. Engage with the community and stakeholders. Do we say with the community and stakeholders?
Yeah, I think yeah.
Okay.
I think that we need to remove that report because that's a little bit inconsistent. Like, we've basically required that and spelled it out in granular detail in the preceding paragraph.
In the second,
I can undo.
yeah, I was going to say in the second sentence, I think we can end it after the word strategic plan and strike and outlined in the annual school performance plan. Just end it right there.
Just a thought, do we want to have them develop their annual equity priorities, or do we want them to say what their equitable needs are? This is sort of empowering each individual district and school or school and district office. I don't even know what the district office really means, but this is to have their annual equity priorities. And I'm not sure that this should be a policy that's implemented school by school. Once again, that's on paragraph 2 under compliance.
So you're saying instead of priorities that each school would develop their annual equity needs aligned with the strategic plan?
Which is up in B.
Priority, is it a?
But no, I'm on compliance paragraph, the second paragraph under compliance. It has schools and district office developing annual equity priorities, which
Aligned with this, aligned with the plan that addresses the specific equity needs identified by the assessment, including training and programming with specific equitable, specific measurable equity outcomes with the timeline. So it's kind of like that, whatever the schools and offices are designed, developing annually, those priorities are aligning with this here, which includes the needs assessment, the training and programming needs, and those outcomes.
I mean, do we want the? I'm just thinking of maybe another way to go at this would be to say that every school is going to provide input on equity needs and priorities. I just worry that otherwise, like my neighborhood public school has a lot of students who are limited English proficiency. We already know this. I imagine the equity report would say we have no staff members who speak Spanish and 40% of our families speak Spanish. Problem. You know, and that's not to blame the district, that's not to blame the school, but it's absolutely a need. I don't want to burden people with paperwork to answer the obvious or just get form responses back. But the input part, the just asking the question part is really important.
So I'm fine with changing that from the priorities to the needs, if that was the initial thought.
So I changed it to each school and district office will provide input on annual equity priorities aligned with the strategic plan. Is that what?
Is the district office a meaningful administrative unit for us, or are we talking building by building?
I mean, you've got your schools, and then you've got all the various. You've got business, you know, and it's you've got business and operations. You've got accountability. You've got you know, information.
So yes, we do want that input. Do we want to say maybe have the opportunity to provide input, or is this a mandate? Everybody's going to be providing input.
I like that because I think this speaks to Panorama. If we use it in such a way, we can build robust assessments that are going out to our educators, to our administrators, to our families. So we could put a question in there that relates to equity and allowing people the opportunity to share feedback. I know in the past we did do a district-wide survey. It's my understanding that Panorama will allow us to restart those and ask more meaningful questions. So I like that, provide an opportunity to provide input. I think that's a great way. The work is then on us to provide that assessment, that survey for people to share it.
Do we want to maybe combine then the second paragraph and the fourth paragraph, if we're talking about and say, the community, stakeholders, every school, and the district office shall have the opportunity to provide input. Then we're getting the whole team together.
I think we keep them separate.
Okay.
Just because, again, the work or the feedback that we get from the community may be more broad, whereas the feedback that we get from the school will drill in on what each particular building needs to do. The feedback that we get from each district office will drill in on what those specific priorities are. I'm really comfortable with the compliance part.
We got 2 board reports. Do we want to delete both of them or just keep one?
I think we delete the report on equity on the bottom paragraph, because that's it's the same as paragraph C of our implementation strategies.
So I like the language of that bottom one, because the board, I think the report is coming from the superintendent and the designee, so the chief of equity. For the Board of Education to provide the report on us achieving those outcomes, to me seems inappropriate because the information is coming to us and we're receiving the report. Does that make sense? We're not providing the annual report. The superintendent and the designee are providing the annual report.
So do we want to then take that paragraph and have that be the very first sentence of implementation strategies? And then only we're going to have to adjust it to not be implementation of the policy. But then say, annually a report will be created on, well, equity needs, equity progress, all of that, period. Annually, the superintendent shall, and then it just launches right in. So move it up to implementation strategies.
Or is it the superintendent does the report and then makes the report to the board?
Well, this is to say, a report's going to be made to the board, and then period, annually the superintendent shall, and then that tells you what that report's going to look like. So if you put that sentence under implementation strategies instead, then you've got all the report is gathered under one bold heading.
Excellent, but then you would take annual down and make that a second paragraph then?
Exactly.
Yeah, take annually down. There you go. A report on equity will be provided to the board annually to ensure implementation of the policy. Annually, the superintendent shall. Yes, this is good.
All right, and so then
we strike that first sentence under compliance, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Completely.
So this doesn't seem to be a compliance piece then necessarily. This is more of a.
Can we make that F?
What? Yeah, or just combine that with E.
I like that. But that brings us back to that compliance piece. Do we need a compliance piece?
This is the compliance is the reporting, I think. It's the gathering, it's the planning process. That's what's chosen, because if you're not going to have people making complaints, if you're not, yeah.
I mean, yeah, I think if you have a report, I guess what does the board intend to do with said report and what actions go from there would be my only question. So if I think Ms. White pointed out, the report comes in, that's your kind of, you now know what was implemented, what wasn't implemented, what the status of things are, and I think that's within your management discretion as far as how you wish to, account for that going forward.
I like that. Baltimore is the only policy that had that compliance piece in it. So I think we're without even having it in there. I think this is a good point.
Yeah. Once again, I think that some of that was a legacy of the fact that it was a very much an employment targeted one as well, which ours is, we keep those two kind of separate. So.
What I think this is actually, this is really good. What I would like us to go back up to are the standards. There's a lot of language in there that I would like everybody to just look over, pull some stuff out, because I don't think we need to define everything under each one of these areas. These were just, again, standards that kind of direct goals. And I definitely don't think we need to list the goals within the policy. But this is just to give you guys an idea of what I was thinking and why the standards were given as recommendations. Does that make sense? So I think we can definitely do some revision in this area to make it less wordy, to make it more direct and concise.
Dr. Pierce, I'll just sort of reiterate again what I said in the beginning, which is that I really love all of that. But the enforceable piece to me are the headings and the goals. And so but I also really like that you're showing your work. And this is a very almost scholarly document, especially with the citations and all of that. I really think that it would be helpful to include that, but not have that be the operable language. To have it say something like, like list them all out and then say, these are our comments, these are the why, the headings and the goals are the what. I'm just throwing that out there. If this were like a statute or an administrative regulation, these would be literally, it would say comments to the regulation. And those are official documents that are published every time, like the Federal Trade Commission issues a new rule. They say, this is what the rule is. You can't do this thing anymore. And then they have the commentary to say, this is why. And you get this sort of scholarly discussion, analysis, explanation for why that is. And sometimes it can be useful in figuring, the reason you include it is because when you're looking at, for instance, what the goals are or believe all students will learn, that explanation informs how we read and how we carry those out. But the citations that have that, it's a little weird to have it in a policy itself.
No, I agree 100%. So that's what I would just, again, my recommendation would be that we look at this element. One, determine which headers we want to keep. All of these, again, were just recommended ones that I feel very strongly about. Again, a lot of this is based upon the Wisconsin equity diversity plan that they have within their district. And we determine which headers we want to keep, and then simplify our rationale for why. Just provide one sentence to go with the headers that we want to keep. And then I would say that we pull the goals out. Again, based upon the board retreats that we've been to thus far, our role in governing should be to create the framework, but from an administrative perspective, they should be coming up with the goals underneath the areas. So I just added those goals in to kind of show where the thought process was, some of the goals that administration could come up with under each heading. Does that make sense? Does everybody get what I'm saying?
I hear you, but I'm not sure those are standards then. I mean,
but you're not sure what are standards.
This standard section, I'm just trying to figure out. So we've got the equity non-discrimination policy, we've got the definitions, and now we've got reports. But how do we turn believe all students will learn into, how do we translate that into a standard?
So for me, the standard is that we value the abilities of our students. So I guess another way to look at it would be, these are our guiding values that will direct the creation of goals. So we could call them policy standards, or we could call them values.
I like calling them values, and once you said that word, it just, that's what these are. And I agree with all of them. Maybe we should use that and just say, you know, in carrying this out, these are the values that will guide it.
I like that. And then that doesn't even then lead to us adding those additional sentences to clarify. We could, as you say, just add that comment section in the back. But I think if we frame them as values, they're understandable. Know the community, understand we all have unique identities and world perspectives, believe all students will learn. I think we could just lay it out as a list. As long as you all are comfortable with how I came to those values. Joellen, Kelsey, Jared, any thoughts on that?
I know I've talked a lot, but I've got one other thought on this.
Okay.
I was just thinking that language kind of reminded me of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is one of the statutes I work with all the time. It has similar language under the findings and purpose that precede the actual meat of the statute. So it says, you know, here, you know, we as Congress find people with disabilities, you know, have historically been excluded from places of public accommodation, from civic participation. You know, it goes through all of that. And then it says, these are our findings of purpose, and these are meant to inform the interpretation and the enforcement of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So, I mean, potentially we could call that statement of purpose, and that would be serve a similar function.
So instead of saying policy standards, you would say, we would change that header to statement of purpose.
Yeah.
So we have our purpose, we have our definitions, statement of purpose. Okay, so could we change that first purpose to preamble? Just so we're not repetitive. You got it in, Judge Brown. You got it in, huh? You were going there. You got it. It took us a couple of meetings. I like that. So then we come down to our statement of purpose. So Dr. Rausch, under all of those, what I'm suggesting is that we remove all the paragraphs under the main headers. So we strike that.
There's so much good stuff here. I'm nervous striking it here because if we want to save it, there's good stuff. I can do this. Do you have all of this in another document, or you just did this all in this, didn't you?
Another document.
Okay. Can you send me that other document then, please, when you have a moment? Only in that it.
You know, I'm looking at the Americans with Disabilities Act right now, and it's remarkable how much we've sort of reinvented the wheel here with both the preamble and the statement of purpose. The ADA has both. It says, you know, historically Congress finds there has been isolation and segregation of individuals with disabilities. There's been historic discrimination. That's under what we have as the preamble. Then the statement of purpose says it's the purpose of this chapter, which in our case would be the policy, to provide a clear, comprehensive national mandate for the elimination of discrimination against people with disabilities, to provide clear, strong, and consistent enforceable standards to address discrimination, and to ensure that the federal government plays a central role in enforcing the statute. Beautiful language. But that's basically what we've created here. We have that preamble language. I think is really important to acknowledge the reason we have this, and then the statement of purpose, you know, launches into our expectations for our students' achievement and what equity looks like.
So then I think under that statement of purpose, we need to give an explicit intro paragraph to these are the guiding values. Is there language that you can pull from?
Sure. Yeah. So in terms of you know, just trying to think of which ones mirror ours. So like the ADA says, the very first finding is, you know, having a physical or mental disability in no way diminishes a person's right to fully participate in all aspects of society. Yet people with physical and mental disabilities have been precluded from doing so because of discrimination, and others who have a record of disability have also been subject to discrimination. It goes through all of that, and we've done that too. And you know, it does that acknowledgement part. But for the standards piece, I think ours is more like the purpose, where it says the purpose of this chapter, so the purpose of this policy is to provide the clear, comprehensive mandate to reduce our inequities in our district, and to provide clear, strong, and consistent statements of our values with respect to equity.
You talk faster than I can type, I'm afraid.
Sorry.
Yeah. So you're pulling this at the ADA Constitution?
No, I'm pulling it straight from the statute from the ADA. So it's 42 USC 12101 subsection B.
101.
12101.
12101.
Yeah.
Yes. So if we take 1 through 4,
We don't have quite as much power as Congress, but
and then pull that over
better
to
it
this
is.
document.
Oh, come on. There we go.
Provide clear, yes. Elimination of take out national and replace discrimination with inequities.
To redress inequities.
Your word was redress instead
Yeah.
of elimination, redress. Okay.
Because I think we've acknowledged we're never going to completely eliminate it, but that doesn't mean that we stop trying.
Yeah, and reduce would be a good word as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if we like enforceable standards. Remove enforceable and just say standards.
Yeah.
Consistent standards addressing.
Addressing inequity, period. Yeah, I'm not sure if we actually do 3 or 4 though.
All of it out. Yeah, we strike 3 and 4 out. But we have to put something, these are the guiding values that direct, these are the guiding values that direct action, guiding values that direct action, that direct our equity plan to remedy. These are the guiding values that direct values. These are the guiding values that guide. These are the guiding values.
How about that inform the implementation of our equity plan?
Did we say direct or inform?
I think they inform.
As opposed to direct. I feel like they direct, that they're inform, that inform our plan and policy that inform and direct our equity plan. Period. Okay, I like it. These are the guiding values that inform and direct our equity plan.
The only other quibble with the values that I see now under the statement of purpose is I really think believe all students will learn should go at the very top.
I like that. So you would move becoming self-aware to C?
Yeah. We might, if we're removing the rest of the text, that one might actually need to be fleshed out a little bit more. I thought the paragraph made it very clear, like the rest of the language, but that's one where I think that the heading needs just a little bit more flesh to it.
Well, maybe we can distill just one sentence about what we mean about each of these, like literally one sentence, and that's it. What do we think about that? One sentence to clarify what each one of these headers mean.
Or simplified summary?
Yes.
While you're doing that, I'm going to have to leave. I'm going to have to sign off.
We are actually at our time.
Yeah. So what I'd suggest is, I mean, you're welcome to continue and finish this. Our next meeting is June 11th. I would suggest that after this is done, that we get a copy of this document out to everybody to take a hard look at. And one of the things that I want to do, and I would suggest to you all, is that we read it through in its entirety, because we've been, working at parts of it without being able to see the whole. But that we do that, get any further comments back to Eric as quickly as possible, and then tee this up for final review and adoption on June 11th.
The beauty of this is that it is in a Google document, so everybody can view it and they can edit it and make their changes, and they'll show up as you probably saw somewhere in here. You can see where Emily made an edit right there. She did that.
Yes.
And so that is the beauty is everybody has access to this with the link. They can make their changes and edits, and then we can.
Perfect.
I will go ahead and.
If you go to the editing pane, you can enter your edits as suggestions, which is what I did. That's how it will show up so other people can see it.
And then I will go ahead and also upload this into Board Docs so that we've got that in the format we'll need. And then we can finalize this on the 11th, and perhaps knock out one or two other lingering updates that we have.
Excellent.
I think you've gotten very close.
Oh yeah, this is good. Lots of good work today. Thank you, Tina and Emily in particular. You've carried this through, so thank you. All right, I have to run. Anybody
I actually have other meetings as well, unfortunately. So I would love to keep working on this, but I do need to. And I know Dr. Pierce, she was supposed to be somewhere an hour ago, I believe. So, but
deliver yard signs. So yes.
So if you want to take, if without objection, I guess, Mr. Chair, you can adjourn.
Anybody have anything more? All right, we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good job.
Let me know when we're off.